Good morning, friends. This is Andrew Meet Rich, and today we are going to talk about a quiet federal rule change that, depending on your circumstances, could mean you cannot leave the country next month. Effective immediately, any American who owes more than $100,000 in unpaid child support is having their passport automatically canceled. No notice, no appeal window, no grace period. The State Department flips the switch and your passport stops working at the airport. Today, we are going to walk through how this works, who it affects, and why it is the most aggressive piece of domestic enforcement the federal government has rolled out in years. Let us start with the legal mechanism. The provision has been on the books since the late 1990s under Section 1979 of the Social Security Act, which allows the State Department to deny or revoke passports for delinquent child support obligations. What changed this month is the threshold and the speed. The threshold was lowered from $2,500 of arrears to a higher dollar amount, but the trigger for automatic action was raised to $100,000, which sounds like a lot until you realize that interest, fees, and back support add up quickly over a decade of underpayment. The Treasury Department's Office of Child Support Services now sends a monthly file of qualifying delinquent payers directly to the State Department. State runs the file against the passport database. Matched passports are flagged for cancellation. The notice goes to the address on file, which, for many delinquent payers, is no longer an accurate address. Now, the numbers. The federal government estimates that there are currently around 190,000 Americans who carry over $100,000 in past due child support. That is a small slice of the total 9.5 million parents who owe any back support nationwide, but it is the slice with the largest balances. About 70% of those 190,000 are men. The average duration of delinquency is 11 years. The average outstanding balance per person is around $140,000. And here is the political pitch. The administration says this measure will recover hundreds of millions of dollars annually for custodial parents who have, in many cases, been waiting more than a decade for payment. Where does this hit people? First, the obvious case. If you have a passport, you owe over $100,000, and you have not made consistent payments in a year, expect a cancellation letter in the next 90 days. Second, the less obvious case. If your passport expires in the next 12 months, you will not be able to renew until your arrears are resolved, or you enter a structured payment plan with your state child support agency. Third, the genuinely tough case. If you are a contractor who works internationally, a long-haul truck driver who crosses the Mexican or Canadian border, a pilot, a sailor, or a remote employee for a company that requires international travel, your passport is your livelihood. The cancellation does not include any provision for occupational hardship. That has been raised at congressional hearings, and the administration has so far declined to add a waiver. Now, let us widen the picture. The passport revocation announcement landed in the same news cycle as several other major files that are worth flagging quickly. First, the Trump administration has filed suit against the state of Colorado over restrictions on large firearm retailers. The suit argues the state-level rules violate the Second Amendment. Colorado's Attorney General is preparing a vigorous defense. This is shaping up to be one of the major federalism cases of the year. Second, the president extended the EU trade deadline to the 4th of July. The previous deadline was earlier this month. Brussels asked for time. The administration granted 2 extra months and tied the new deadline symbolically to America's 250th independence anniversary. If a deal is not signed by then, expect a steep tariff package on European cars, wine, and aerospace components. The European Commission is preparing a contingency response. Third, the president took credit for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine that ran from the 8th to the 11th of this month. The truce had actually been announced unilaterally by the Russian military command several days before the president made the claim. State Department officials privately acknowledged that American mediation did not produce the pause, but that the political optics matter at home, where many independent voters want to see progress on the file. Fourth, the Pentagon released 162 declassified documents on unexplained aerial phenomena. The collection includes witness testimony, photographs, and incident reports stretching back decades, including materials from the Apollo missions. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said in a brief statement that the release is part of a broader transparency initiative. Career analysts inside the intelligence community are reportedly furious that the release happened without an interagency review. Fifth, the Pentagon also unveiled the Lucas kamikaze drone, a reverse-engineered American answer to an inexpensive foreign design. Unit cost is around $35,000, which is about 20 times more expensive than the original. The Pentagon says the difference in cost reflects American engineering and survivability. Critics in Congress say it reflects a procurement system that cannot match low-cost adversary innovation. And that is the conversation Washington does not want to have on television. Sixth, gas prices in the lower 48 states crossed $4.20 per gallon for the first time since the post-pandemic spike. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is at a 30-year low. Wholesale data suggests another 15 to 20 cent rise is coming in June. Households earning under $60,000 per year are absorbing the cost through credit card debt, which set a new record this quarter. Seventh, SNAP benefits are being cut by 14% under the new federal budget. About 42 million Americans are on SNAP. The cut translates to roughly $70 less per family per month at the supermarket. Combined with food inflation running at 4.2%, this is a real squeeze for working families. Food bank demand is up 30% year over year in 21 states. Eighth, the New York State Legislature passed a 5% wealth surcharge on households earning over $20 million annually. The measure was framed by opponents as targeting white families, which has triggered a heated debate. Supporters insist the measure is racially neutral and is targeted at the top income decile. Either way, the precedent is set for other blue states to follow, and the wealthy clients of New York's private banks are already calling their accountants. Ninth, the IMF released a quiet but devastating staff paper this month admitting that the global economy is operating below its pre-2020 trend by approximately 3 percentage points. Translation: the world has lost a permanent chunk of growth, and the recovery the official forecasts kept promising is not coming. Inflation in the United States is now running at 3.3% in March, which sounds modest but is brutal once you remove rent and shelter from the basket. There is one more piece of context I want to add before we wrap, because it ties the passport story to a broader pattern. The federal government has, over the last 24 months, quietly expanded the use of administrative actions tied to immigration, tax, and now child support. Passport revocation for federal tax debt above $62,000 has been on the books for years, but enforcement has accelerated. Treasury Department data show that passport flags for tax debt are up 40% year over year. State Department Visa Office data show that domestic enforcement holds. The practice of refusing to issue a passport renewal while a federal claim is unresolved have doubled in 2 years. The new child support trigger sits inside this pattern. The question is not whether one specific rule is justified, because most people will agree that $100,000 of unpaid child support is a serious obligation. The question is the cumulative effect of stacking administrative penalties tied to a single travel document that for a growing share of the American workforce is also a tool for earning a living. Where does this leave us? A passport revocation policy targeting 190,000 Americans, a federal lawsuit against Colorado, a trade deadline shifted to July 4th, a claimed ceasefire that did not happen the way the press release suggested, a flood of UFO documents, a drone procurement scandal, gas at $4.20, SNAP cut by 14%, a New York wealth surcharge, and an IMF paper that quietly admits the world is running below trend. This is a heavy news cycle, and most of these files will define the second half of the year. If this breakdown was useful, please drop a like and a comment telling me which of these stories actually hits your household budget first. I read every comment. Subscribe so you do not miss the next briefing, where we will dig deeper into the passport revocation rule and what families need to do if a notice arrives in the mail. I am Andrew Meetrich, and this is U.S. News and World Reports. See you tomorrow.